I always believed that marriage was a fortress. A place where you could be yourself, where you were loved not for the pretty words, but for who you truly were. But now, when I look at my husband, I feel cold. Not because of the distance between us, but because I realize I don't know him at all. It all started on an ordinary evening. He was working late, as usual, and I, suspecting nothing, was preparing dinner. I turned on my favorite playlist, lit some candles, those little things that make a house feel like home. When I dialed his number to ask if he'd be home soon, I got a busy signal. Nothing unusual, work calls, meetings. But something inside me whispered that this time, it was different. I couldn't explain why this time. The feeling was so strong. Leaving everything as it was, I decided to check our shared laptop. He always left it open because we have nothing to hide from each other. It was just one click. One brief moment that split my life into before and after. His email was open. And among dozens of work emails, there were messages from M, short, but full of emotion. I already miss you. Can't wait for our next meeting. Yours, M. My heart froze. M, who is she? Why does she write to him with such tenderness? And why does he reply? I read their conversations, barely breathing. Dinners I knew nothing about, gifts I'd never heard of, and words I hadn't heard from him in a long time. I'm so happy you're in my life. Tears filled my eyes, but I held them back. I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by flickering candles, with my phone still dialing his number. But now I didn't want him to pick up. We were always a team. At least I thought so. But now it all seemed like a scene from someone else's movie, where I was just a side character, clueless and naive. I was overwhelmed with anger, but at the same time, a strange calmness. I realized I didn't want to wait for explanations anymore. I wanted the truth. The next time he walks through the door of our home, I will no longer be that naive woman who blindly believes his words. This was just the beginning. I spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of our life together. Every late-night meeting, every sudden business trip, every hushed phone call that ended the moment I entered the room. Was it always this obvious? Had I been blind, or just too trusting? I remembered the way he'd brush off my questions with that same reassuring smile. You worry too much, babe. It's just work. Work. I hated that word now. By the time the sun began to creep through the blinds, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. No, I wanted the truth. Not the version he would twist with perfect excuses and well-crafted lies. I wanted real answers. I started with his phone. He always kept it locked, but we'd been together long enough for me to know his passcode, our anniversary. I almost laughed at the irony. Messages. I scrolled quickly, looking for her. And there she was. Not just in messages, but in photos. Pictures of them at a cafe I'd never been to, her hand resting on his arm. A beach I didn't recognize, his fingers tangled in her hair. My breath caught in my throat. He had taken her to the coast. Our favorite place. The place where he proposed to me 5 years ago, on a rainy afternoon with sand sticking to our shoes. The betrayal hit me like a wave, crashing over me, pulling me under. How many times had I sat alone, eating dinner by myself, waiting for him to come home, while he was there with her? My hands shook, but I kept scrolling. I needed more. I needed to understand the depths of his lies. There were voice messages too. I hesitated for just a second before pressing play. Her voice. Soft, sweet. I miss you. When can I see you again? I hate when you go back to her. It doesn't feel right. You belong with me. The tears spilled over. Not because of her words, but because he had replied. His voice, warm and gentle, an intimacy he hadn't used with me in years. Soon, baby. I just need to take care of a few things. I promise it won't be much longer. My hands tightened around the phone, my vision blurred. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. I didn't want to scream. Not yet. Because now I was planning. If he thought he could lie to me, walk through our door with that same charming smile, kiss my cheek like everything was fine. He was wrong. Dead wrong. I wiped my tears and took a deep breath. The mask had fallen, and now it was my turn to play the game. When he finally came home that evening, I was ready. Dinner was on the table, his favorite. The candles were lit, and soft jazz played from the speakers. Everything looked perfect. I watched his eyes widen slightly as he walked through the door. He always loved it when I made an effort. And tonight, I did. I wore the dress he once said I looked breathtaking in, the one I hadn't pulled out of the closet in over a year. My hair was neatly done, makeup flawless. "Wow," he said, a smile spreading across his face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But just as quickly, it vanished. "What's the occasion?" I laughed lightly, motioning him to the table. "Do I need a reason to spoil my husband?" He chuckled, setting his briefcase by the door and slipping off his jacket. "I guess not. It's just unexpected." I poured him a glass of his favorite red wine and watched as he took a sip, closing his eyes in appreciation. For a second, I felt that familiar pang of love, the man I married, the man I once trusted with everything. But then I remembered her voice in those messages, and the feeling evaporated. We ate in silence for a while, just the clink of forks and the soft hum of music. I let him relax, let him feel safe. I even asked about his day, nodding in the right places, smiling when appropriate. He seemed to buy it. And why wouldn't he? I had always been the perfect wife. Attentive, patient, never prying too much. I gave him space when he needed it, trusted him blindly. I wondered now if he mistook my kindness for weakness. If he thought I'd never catch on. After dinner, I poured him another glass of wine and suggested we sit on the sofa. He seemed surprised. I hadn't asked for quality time in ages, but he followed me willingly. I curled up next to him, resting my head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne. I wondered if she knew the scent as well as I did. I tilted my head up, looking at him with soft eyes. "I've missed this," I whispered. His arm tightened around me instinctively, and he kissed my forehead. "Me too," he replied, his voice low. And for a second, just a second, I almost believed him. But I couldn't afford to. Not now. Not after everything I'd seen. I smiled up at him, pressing my lips softly to his. He responded instantly, like he always did, pulling me closer, fingers tangling in my hair. And I let him. I let him feel like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. Because I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him oblivious. The illusion was perfect. But now I was done being the perfect wife. Because I had a plan. And he wouldn't even see it coming. The next morning, I woke up before him. The sun was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting long shadows across our bedroom. He was still asleep, his breathing steady, face peaceful. I watched him for a moment, wondering how someone who looked so calm could hold so many secrets. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. Downstairs, the house was silent. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand. Today was the day I would start collecting the pieces. I knew his schedule well enough. He would be out of the house by 8, at the office until 6, sometimes later if he had meetings. Meetings. I almost laughed at how easily I'd believed him all these years. By the time he came downstairs, I was already dressed, hair pinned back neatly, laptop open. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're up early," he noted, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I smiled, tapping away at my screen. "I have some things to catch up on," I replied casually. He kissed me on the cheek, lingering just a bit longer than usual. "I'll see you tonight," he said, his voice gentle. For a split second, I felt that familiar warmth. But it vanished as soon as he closed the door behind him. The second he was gone, I got to work. I started with his emails, those that I had skimmed through before, now reading in detail. There were more messages from M, spread out over months. Coffee dates, weekend trips, late-night rendezvous. He even sent her pictures of our dog, with captions like, "He misses you." My stomach churned, but I kept scrolling. I couldn't stop now. After an hour, I moved on to his finances. Our bank accounts were mostly joint, but he had one I never paid attention to, just a small account he called his emergency fund. I always thought it was responsible of him to have it. Now I knew better. The transactions told the real story. Hotel bookings under obscure names, flowers delivered to addresses I didn't recognize, expensive dinners at restaurants he'd never taken me to. It was all there, in plain sight, hidden in the numbers. But the final blow came when I opened our phone bill. He never bothered to look at it. I always handled it. And now I knew why. Pages and pages of text messages, late-night calls, all to the same number. Her number. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, mind racing. He had been so careless, so confident that I would never look, never ask. He had underestimated me. But now I had everything I needed. Dates, locations, times. I knew when he saw her, where they went, and even how much he spent. My hands stopped shaking. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what would come next. I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do. I picked up my phone and dialed. The voice on the other end was soft, familiar. "Hey," I said, my voice steady. "I need your help. And I need you to be discreet." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Of course. What do you need?" I looked around the empty house, feeling the weight of the silence settle around me. "I need to find out everything about her. Who she is, where she works, everything." There was another pause, then, "Give me 2 days." I hung up, my heart finally slowing, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. 2 days. That was all I needed. Because I wasn't just collecting pieces anymore. I was getting ready to use them. The 2 days dragged on painfully slow. Every hour felt like 1,000 heartbeats pounding in my chest, reminding me of what I had uncovered. But I waited. I had to. He came home every night, kissed my cheek, asked about my day. I smiled back, played my part. I even laughed at his jokes, cooked him dinner, folded his shirts just the way he liked. It was almost funny how easy it was to pretend, how perfectly I could mirror the life he thought we still had. But inside, I was a storm. On the second evening, just as I was about to start dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a text. "Got what you need. Call me." My hands shook as I dialed. The voice on the other end picked up on the first ring. "I found her," she said without hesitation. "Her name is Melissa Grant. She works at a design firm downtown. And she's married." Married. I sank into the nearest chair, gripping the phone like it might slip away. "Married?" I whispered, disbelief thick in my voice. "Yep. 3 years. Husband's name is Jonathan. They live on Maple Street, just outside the city." My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even known were there. He's been playing both sides. It wasn't just me he was lying to, it was her husband too. "And there's more," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "Melissa's husband, he has no idea." I went through some of her social media, did a little digging. Their accounts are full of happy pictures, anniversary posts, vacations. He doesn't know a thing. I swallowed hard, my mind already spinning with possibilities. He had been reckless, and now I had the proof. All of it. "Thank you," I murmured, barely able to find my voice. "Listen," she added, her tone softening. "What are you going to do?" I stared out the window, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, painting everything in shades of red. It felt poetic. Fitting. "I'm going to end it," I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. "But not yet. Not until I have everything lined up." There was silence on the other end, then a soft sigh. "If you need anything, just call. And be careful." I hung up and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth settle around me like armor. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. That night, when he came home, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss. He told me he'd be working late again tomorrow, some emergency meeting with the board. I just nodded and kissed him on the cheek. But this time, I knew exactly where he would be. And I was going to be there too. The next morning, I woke up before him again. I couldn't sleep, not with everything racing through my mind. I moved through the house like a shadow, making coffee, folding laundry, watching the clock tick closer to 8 a.m. When he finally came downstairs, he kissed my cheek like always, oblivious. "I'll be late tonight," he said, sipping his coffee. "Big meeting. Don't wait up, okay?" I smiled. "Of course. Good luck, honey." He walked out the door, and I watched him from the window as he got into his car, adjusted the mirror, and pulled away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty driveway, my hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. I waited exactly 15 minutes before grabbing my bag. Everything I needed was already inside: camera, notepad, phone fully charged. I had mapped out his entire route, knew the turns he would take, the parking lot he would use. He didn't disappoint. He parked 2 blocks away from her office, the same spot he'd used every time. I stayed far enough behind, careful not to catch his eye as he strolled down the sidewalk, glancing at his watch. He always timed his arrival perfectly. She was waiting for him outside. Melissa. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she smiled at him the way I used to, like he was her whole world. I watched as he leaned in, kissed her like she was his secret treasure, his hidden escape. My fingers tightened around the camera, and I took the shot. Then another. And another. They walked together, hand in hand, laughing at some private joke as they made their way into a small cafe. I snapped more photos, documenting every touch, every look. He brushed her hair from her face, kissed her forehead, whispered something that made her laugh. I stayed outside, watching them through the glass, feeling strangely calm. There were no tears, no shaking hands. Just a steady, rhythmic pulse of purpose. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was evidence. They left the cafe an hour later, oblivious to the world around them. I followed at a distance, watching as they turned down a narrow street, hand in hand, until they reached a small hotel. I almost laughed at how cliché it was. He held the door for her, his hand resting gently on her back as they stepped inside. I took the final shot as the door closed behind them, sealing away their little secret. I stared at the hotel for a long moment, my breath steady, my heart calm. I didn't need to go in. I didn't need to confront him. Not yet. I had everything I needed. Sliding my phone from my bag, I dialed the number I had saved just yesterday. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Hello." "Hi," I replied smoothly. "Is this Jonathan Grant?" "Yes." "Who is this?" His voice was cautious, guarded. "My name doesn't matter," I said, my voice steady. "But I think you should know that your wife is at the Hillside Hotel right now. Room 214. With my husband." There was silence. For a moment, I thought he'd hung up. But then I heard him inhale sharply. "What did you just say?" I repeated it, slower this time, and gave him the address. "If you want proof," I added, "I have it. Pictures, dates, places. Everything." He was quiet again, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Send them to me," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. I smiled to myself. "I'll do one better. Let's meet. Say, tomorrow? Somewhere public." He agreed without hesitation, and I hung up, slipping my phone back into my bag. The hard part was done. Now it was time for the grand finale. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. There was no more panic, no more questioning. I knew exactly what I had to do. He left early, as usual, with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to be late again. I watched him leave with a soft smile, my fingers brushing the place where he kissed me, almost like I was wiping it away. I dressed carefully that morning, sharp, confident. The kind of outfit that made people look twice. I needed to feel powerful, unshakable. And I did. The cafe I chose for the meeting was busy but not crowded, perfectly public. I sat by the window, sipping my coffee and watching the world move outside. When Jonathan walked in, I knew it was him instantly. Tall, dark hair, sharp eyes scanning the room until he found me. He walked over, shoulders tense, and sat down across from me. "You're her husband?" he asked bluntly. I nodded, taking another sip of my coffee. "And you're hers." For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, two strangers connected by betrayal. Finally, I slid my phone across the table. "It's all there. Pictures, texts, locations. Everything you need to know." Jonathan picked up the phone and scrolled, his jaw tightening with every swipe. I watched his hands clench around the device, knuckles turning white. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Months." "At least 6, I replied calmly. "But judging by their messages, probably longer." He nodded, sliding the phone back to me. "And what do you want from me?" I leaned back, studying him. He was hurt, angry, but composed. The kind of man who didn't crumble under pressure. "I want to end this," I said, my voice steady. "For good. But I need your help." His eyes met mine, curiosity mixed with determination. "What are you thinking?" I leaned forward, dropping my voice. "They think we don't know. They're living in this fantasy, believing they've fooled us. I say we show them just how wrong they are." A slow smile spread across his face. "You want to confront them?" I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I want to make sure they feel everything we've felt. And when they're at their highest, that's when we take it all away." Jonathan chuckled darkly, nodding his head. "I like the way you think." We spent the next hour plotting. It was almost surreal. Me, a stranger to this man, now his accomplice. But there was something satisfying about it. Something powerful. We exchanged numbers, shook hands, and left the cafe with a mutual understanding. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. 2 weeks later, the plan was in motion. I started leaving little hints. A lipstick stain on his shirt, one I carefully placed myself. Perfume on his jacket that wasn't mine. An earring on the passenger seat of his car, tucked just under the edge of the mat. He noticed, of course, but he didn't say anything. He started coming home later, drinking more. I could see the guilt eating at him, even if he never admitted it. I played the part of the clueless wife perfectly. I asked him if everything was all right, kissed his cheek, packed his lunch. And then, Jonathan did his part. He began to pull away from Melissa, just slightly. Canceled plans, ignored texts. Made excuses that left her frustrated and confused. She, of course, went to my husband for comfort. It was almost poetic. The final act came 3 weeks later. Jonathan and I arranged everything. I was dressed in my best, ready for the performance of a lifetime. He picked me up at exactly 6 p.m., and we drove in silence to the address we both knew by heart. The hotel. Room 214. We walked in together, our footsteps synchronized as we climbed the stairs. Jonathan knocked twice. Firm. Confident. There was shuffling inside, whispers, and finally, the door creaked open. My husband's face turned pale as he saw us standing there, side by side. Melissa appeared behind him, clutching the sheet to her chest, eyes wide with horror. "Surprise," I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. My husband stumbled over his words, his eyes darting back and forth between us. I can explain." I smiled, taking a step forward. "Oh, I'm sure you can. But I'm not here for your excuses." I turned to Melissa. "I'm here to tell you that you're welcome to him. Because as of today, he's all yours." I dropped the envelope I had been holding onto the floor. "Divorce papers. Signed." Jonathan did the same. Another envelope, another set of papers. Melissa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. You can't." She stammered. Jonathan looked at her with a mix of pity and disdain. "Oh, I can." And I did. We turned and walked out together, leaving them standing there naked, stunned, and completely exposed. Outside, I took a deep breath, the weight of years of lies lifting off my shoulders. Jonathan turned to me, a grin spreading across his face. "You're a dangerous woman," he said with a laugh. I looked back at him, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I guess I am," I replied. "And I'm just getting started." 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker like tiny fireflies. The view was breathtaking: open skies, distant lights, and freedom stretching out before me. The divorce had been swift, almost too easy. He didn't fight. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to fight for. Maybe the shame of exposure had drained him of whatever strength he had left. Either way, I got everything I wanted. I had taken my time, planned every detail with precision. The financials, the assets, even the house, he handed it over with barely a word. I think he wanted out just as much as I did, but for entirely different reasons. I stayed in the house for a few weeks, just to feel the empty rooms, to let the silence wash over me like a cleansing rain. But it was haunted with memories I didn't want anymore. I sold it to a young couple with big dreams and bigger hearts. I wish them well, genuinely. Melissa and Jonathan? I heard through mutual friends that their divorce was messy. Lawyers, accusations, whispers of betrayal that spread through their social circles like wildfire. He moved out. She moved back to her parents. Their perfect little life, shattered beyond repair. And me? I rebuilt. I took a job offer that I had once brushed off because it required travel, something he never wanted me to do. Now I could go anywhere, be anyone. I visited Spain, walked along the beaches of Mallorca, ate tapas under fairy lights that glowed like tiny stars. I spent time with friends I had neglected, reconnected with family, and learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. I rediscovered old hobbies, painting, reading long novels on rainy Sundays, dancing barefoot in my living room to music I loved. One evening, I got a call from Jonathan. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was lighter, almost joyful. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, pausing as if choosing his next words carefully. "You saved me from a lie I didn't even know I was living." I laughed softly, leaning against the balcony rail. "Funny," I replied. "I guess you saved me too." We didn't talk long, just enough to acknowledge what we had been through. There was no talk of meeting up, no hints of anything more. Just two people, scarred but healing on opposite sides of a broken promise. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I raised my glass to the horizon, to the city that lay before me, to the life that was now fully mine. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who trusted too easily, who loved too blindly. I toasted her too, because she had finally learned how to let go. The end.